She didn't raise her voice. She didn't chase attention. She didn't call a press conference or demand the world listen. And yet, when she finally spoke, something shifted. The kind of shift you feel deep inside, not in your ears but in your chest. A mother's voice has that power. Especially when that mother has watched her child walk through criticism, pressure, loneliness, greatness, and misunderstanding on a scale few humans ever experience. This wasn't the warning people expected. It wasn't about technology. It wasn't about money, rockets, or the future of artificial intelligence. It was about something far more uncomfortable. Something far more personal. Something the world avoids hearing. She spoke about the cost of becoming extraordinary, not in numbers. Not in achievements. But in silent nights. In misunderstood decisions. In moments where love is delayed, relationships are strained, and comfort is sacrificed for purpose. She spoke as a woman who didn't just give birth to a genius, but who watched that genius be shaped by pressure before the world ever applauded. She warned the world not to confuse success with ease. She said that from the outside, people see confidence, boldness, risk-taking. But from the inside, what builds someone like Elon is an endless wrestling with doubt, responsibility, and expectation. She spoke of how brilliance is often born in discomfort. And how those who chase the shine without understanding the sacrifice will break under the weight of it. Her words weren't polished for headlines. They felt raw. Maternal. Protective. Almost pleading, she warned parents not to rush their children into becoming impressive before they become resilient. She warned young dreamers not to romanticize greatness without preparing their hearts for isolation. She warned admirers not to idolize outcomes while ignoring the human being carrying them, and then she said something no one expected. She said the world is becoming impatient with the process. She said people want instant legends, instant wealth, instant answers, instant validation. But the people who actually change the world are shaped slowly, painfully, often invisibly. They are misunderstood long before they are celebrated. Criticized long before they are believed in. And sometimes, even after success arrives, the loneliness doesn't leave. She spoke about how strength is not loud. How real confidence doesn't need approval. How the most dangerous thing a person can lose is not money or reputation, but their inner compass. She warned that fame without grounding destroys people. That intelligence without humility isolates them. That ambition without purpose hollows them out, and as she spoke, it became clear, this wasn't just about her son. This was about anyone who feels called to something bigger than comfort. She spoke to the dreamer who feels out of place, the builder who feels misunderstood, the visionary who feels alone in a room full of people, the person who keeps moving forward even when no one claps. She warned you not to measure your worth by how quickly the world recognizes you. Not to confuse criticism with failure. Not to let public opinion rewrite your private convictions. She said mothers see things the world doesn't. They see the nights of exhaustion behind the achievements. The emotional weight behind the bold decisions. The sensitivity hidden behind the tough exterior. She said her greatest fear was never that her child would fail, but that the world would forget he was human. That warning landed heavy, because the world loves results but forgets the cost. It loves innovation but resents the innovator. It celebrates disruption but punishes the disruptor. She warned that if you are building something meaningful, you will be misunderstood. If you are walking a path few dare to walk, you will be criticized by those who never leave the starting line. And if you are truly driven by purpose, there will be seasons where you must choose calling over comfort. She spoke gently, but the truth was sharp. She said, don't envy the pressure you don't see. Don't desire the responsibility you're not prepared to carry. Don't wish for influence without understanding the burden of being watched, judged, and dissected. And then, unexpectedly, she spoke about love. She said love doesn't always look like protection from hardship. Sometimes love looks like allowing someone to struggle so they can become strong. Sometimes love looks like stepping back and trusting the process, even when your heart wants to shield them from pain. She said she learned that lesson early. That warning wasn't dramatic. It was sobering. She warned a generation raised on applause that silence is not rejection. She warned a culture addicted to validation that inner clarity matters more than external praise. She warned that chasing approval is the fastest way to lose yourself. She said the strongest people she knows aren't the ones who never fail, but the ones who keep their integrity intact when failure comes. She spoke about how her son learned early to think independently, to question assumptions, to endure being the odd one out. And she warned that independence comes with a price: loneliness, criticism, and responsibility. But she also said something hopeful. She said that those who stay true through the pressure eventually find peace, not because the world becomes kinder, but because they become steadier. She warned against raising children to be impressive instead of grounded. She warned against raising leaders who fear being disliked. She warned against building a future without emotional strength. Her words weren't a rejection of ambition. They were a reminder of balance. She said ambition without character is dangerous, success without self-awareness is fragile, power without empathy is destructive. And then she ended with a quiet truth that lingered long after her voice faded. She said the world doesn't need more famous people, it needs more whole people. People who know who they are when no one is watching. People who don't collapse when applause fades. People who can carry responsibility without losing compassion. Her warning wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real, and maybe that's why it unsettled people, because it forced a question most avoid. What is your success costing you? Not in money, not in time, but in peace. In connection, in truth, she reminded everyone that behind every extraordinary individual is a human story full of sacrifice, doubt, and endurance. And that if we truly admire greatness, we must also respect the weight it carries. This wasn't a warning meant to scare you away from dreaming. It was a warning meant to prepare you to dream wisely, to build slowly, to stay grounded, to protect your inner life as fiercely as your outer goals. And perhaps the most unexpected thing she said wasn't about her son at all. It was about you. She said if you feel called to something bigger than yourself, don't rush the becoming. Don't harden your heart to survive. Don't trade your values for velocity. Let patience shape you. Let humility anchor you. Let purpose guide you when applause disappears, because the world will test you, success will test you, attention will test you, and when those tests come, the only thing that will hold you steady is who you became before the world started watching. That was the warning. She didn't stop there. What followed was softer in tone, but heavier in meaning, as if she knew the first warning would stir people, but the second would stay with them. She spoke about the unseen consequences of living ahead of your time. How visionaries often feel like strangers in their own era, how they are celebrated for results but rarely understood for motives. She said that when someone thinks differently, the world first tries to correct them. If that fails, it tries to mock them. And if that still doesn't work, it tries to break them. Not always with cruelty, sometimes with expectations, labels, and constant scrutiny. She warned that pressure doesn't only come from enemies. It often comes from admirers who demand perfection. She spoke about how the world forgets that courage has limits too. That even the strongest minds need rest, silence, and space to breathe. She warned that constantly being on slowly erodes the soul, and that greatness without recovery becomes a prison. She said she watched her son carry responsibility long before he was ready to enjoy life the way others did. Not because anyone forced him, but because purpose has its own gravity. When you feel responsible for something bigger than yourself, leisure feels undeserved. Rest feels like betrayal. And joy feels postponed. That was the part that unsettled people the most. She warned that some of the most driven individuals don't struggle with laziness. They struggle with allowing themselves to be human. They punish themselves for slowing down. They equate rest with weakness. And over time, that inner pressure becomes heavier than any external criticism. She said she had to remind him, more than once, that his value didn't come from output. That his worth wasn't measured in achievements, companies, or headlines. That even if everything failed, he would still be enough. She warned parents, leaders, and mentors listening to stop praising children only for what they produce. Stop tying love to performance. Stop teaching them that being exceptional is the same as being worthy. She said that lesson matters more now than ever, because the world is louder, the comparisons are endless. And the pressure to prove yourself never sleeps. She warned that social validation has become a substitute for inner conviction. That people are shaping their lives around reactions instead of truth. And that chasing applause trains the mind to fear silence. She said silence is where clarity lives, silence is where identity forms, silence is where purpose matures, and yet, silence is what most people avoid. She spoke about how criticism changes when you reach a certain level. It stops being about what you do and becomes about who you are. Your motives are questioned. Your character is analyzed. Your humanity is reduced to headlines and sound bites. She warned that if you don't know who you are before that happens, the world will define you for you, and it will not be kind. She said she taught her children to think independently, not because it would make life easier, but because it would make them freer. And freedom, she said, always comes with loneliness at first. Because thinking differently means standing apart before others understand. She warned that the early stages of any meaningful path feel isolating. Friends drift. Support thins. Doubt grows louder. And that's where most people quit, not because the path is wrong, but because the silence is uncomfortable. She said that's the moment character is forged, not when success arrives, not when applause comes, but when no one is watching. And you keep going anyway. She warned against becoming emotionally armored, against confusing toughness with numbness. She said strength doesn't mean you stop feeling, it means you don't let feelings control your direction. She spoke about resilience as something quieter than people imagine. Not loud confidence, but steady endurance. Not aggression, but patience. Not domination, but discipline. She warned that brilliance without emotional maturity can destroy relationships. That intensity without empathy can wound the people closest to you. And that vision without humility eventually collapses under its own weight. Her voice carried something deeper here, not criticism, but concern. She said she had watched many talented people burn out not because they weren't capable, but because they tried to carry everything alone. They believed asking for help would weaken their image. They believed vulnerability would dilute their authority. She warned that isolation is the hidden tax of ambition. She said the world applauds self-made narratives, but no one truly builds alone. Even the strongest need grounding voices, people who remind them who they are when pressure distorts perspective. She warned against confusing independence with isolation, against confusing leadership with control, against confusing vision with ego. And then she said something almost paradoxical. She said the more responsibility you carry, the gentler you must become inside, not softer in conviction, but gentler in spirit, because power amplifies whatever already exists within you. If you carry unresolved wounds, power exposes them. If you carry humility, power expresses it. If you carry fear, power magnifies it. She warned that success doesn't change people, it reveals them. She said that's why inner work matters more than outer momentum. Why healing matters more than hustling. Why self-awareness matters more than speed. She warned a generation chasing influence to first learn self-governance, to master their reactions, to discipline their thoughts, to stay anchored when everything around them accelerates. She said the most dangerous moment in a person's life isn't failure, it's early success without inner stability, because failure humbles, but unchecked success inflates. She spoke about how she prayed, not for protection from hardship, but for wisdom to know when to step in and when to step back. She said motherhood taught her that control is an illusion, and trust is a discipline. She warned that trying to control outcomes breeds anxiety. But trusting the process builds peace. She said the world wants certainty, but growth requires uncertainty. It requires risk. It requires the courage to move forward without guarantees, and she warned that if you wait until you feel fully ready, you will never move. She said courage isn't the absence of fear, it's obedience to purpose in the presence of fear. She warned that those who are meant to shape the future will always feel tension with the present. They will be criticized for moving too fast by some, and too slow by others. And if they listen to everyone, they will lose themselves. She said discernment is knowing which voices to ignore. She warned against living reactively, against letting every comment, every trend, every opinion steer your direction. She said clarity comes from alignment, not popularity. Her words didn't glorify struggle. They honored it. She said struggle isn't a sign you're doing something wrong, it's often proof you're doing something meaningful. But she warned not to become addicted to struggle either. Not to confuse pain with purpose. She said purpose brings fulfillment, not constant exhaustion, and as she continued, it became clear, this wasn't a warning meant only for the powerful or famous. It was for anyone carrying a heavy calling quietly. Anyone feeling pressure to become something before they've had time to become themselves. She warned you not to rush your evolution, not to harden your heart to survive, not to silence your inner voice to fit expectations, because the world will reward speed, but life rewards depth, and depth takes time. She said if you listen carefully, not to noise, but to truth, you'll know when to push and when to pause, when to fight and when to release, when to speak and when to stay silent. She warned that wisdom often whispers while ego shouts, and those who learn to hear the whisper endure. That was the second part of the warning, less dramatic, more intimate, and perhaps even more necessary, because it wasn't about what the world demands from you. It was about what you must protect within yourself to survive becoming who you're meant to be. In the final moments, her words slowed, as if she wanted each sentence to land gently but permanently. This was no longer a warning spoken outward, it felt like guidance spoken inward. The kind of truth a mother shares not to control the future, but to steady it. She said that eventually, Every driven person reaches a crossroads the world never sees. A moment where ambition asks a question purpose must answer. A moment where you realize you can keep going faster, or you can go deeper. She warned that many people mistake motion for meaning, progress for peace. She said she watched her son reach heights few imagine, yet still face the same internal questions every human does. Am I living aligned? Am I becoming who I said I would be? Am I protecting what truly matters? Or sacrificing it in the name of achievement? She warned that success will always ask for something in return. Time, privacy, relationships, simplicity. And if you're not intentional, it will take more than you meant to give. She said the most dangerous lie ambition tells is that you can make it all up later. That you can postpone rest, love, joy, and still remain whole. She warned that some things, once neglected too long, don't return in the same form. She spoke about presence. She said presence is the quiet casualty of modern greatness. Being physically somewhere but mentally elsewhere. Accomplishing much but feeling little. Winning externally while drifting internally. She warned that if you lose presence, you lose your life in pieces. Days pass, moments blur, and one day you wake up successful but disconnected from the very reason you started. She said she reminded her children that life is not meant to be endured until success arrives. It is meant to be lived while becoming. That joy is not a reward at the end, it is nourishment along the way. She warned against glorifying constant pressure, against wearing exhaustion as a badge of honor, against confusing suffering with seriousness. She said seriousness of purpose does not require misery of spirit. She spoke about humility, not as weakness, but as grounding. As the ability to stay teachable even when powerful. To listen even when influential. To remember that no matter how high you climb, you are still accountable to truth. She warned that the higher you go, the fewer people will challenge you honestly. Praise will surround you. Agreement will come easily. And that is when discernment matters most. She said every person needs at least one place where they are not impressive. One space where they are simply human. Where they can fail safely. Where they are loved without expectations. She warned that without that space, even the strongest fracture under the weight of image. She spoke about identity. She said never let the world name you completely. Never let a role, a title, or a reputation consume your sense of self. Because when those things change, as they always do, you must still know who you are. She warned that when identity is outsourced, stability disappears. She said she raised her children to ask better questions than how far can I go? She taught them to ask at what cost? And for what purpose? And who am I becoming along the way? She said the future belongs not to the fastest, but to the most grounded. Not to the loudest, but to the clearest. Not to those who chase attention, but to those who can withstand it. She warned that attention is intoxicating. It feels like validation, but it erodes privacy, clarity, and peace if consumed without restraint. She said learning to step back is as important as learning to push forward. Learning to say no is as powerful as learning to say yes. She warned that wisdom often looks like restraint in a world obsessed with expansion. Then her voice softened again. She said a mother never stops worrying, not about success, but about wholeness. Not about recognition, but about alignment. Not about legacy, but about peace. She said her deepest hope was not that her son would be admired, but that he would remain anchored. That no matter how intense the world became, he would still recognize himself in the mirror. She warned that the greatest danger to any visionary is forgetting why they began. She said beginnings are pure. Motivations are clear. Intentions are honest. And along the way, noise tries to rewrite them. She warned you to revisit your beginning often, to remember what mattered before applause, to remember who believed in you before results, to remember what you promised yourself when no one was watching. She said that remembrance is protection. She ended not with fear, but with reassurance. She said that those who walk with integrity may stumble, but they don't collapse. Those who build patiently may be delayed, but they are not denied. Those who choose depth over speed eventually find a peace that success alone cannot give. She said the world will continue to chase what shines. But those who endure will be those who cultivate what lasts. Character, clarity, compassion, conviction. She said if you carry a big vision, carry an even bigger heart. If you hold great power, hold greater humility. If you pursue the future, do not abandon the present. And finally, she said this: the measure of a life is not how much it changes the world, but how much truth it keeps while doing so. That was the final warning, not dramatic, not alarming, but enduring. A mother reminding the world that behind every force of change is a fragile human soul, and that protecting